Our meditation comes from the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker and is entitled Choose to Bless the World. It works well with the stool for both of us. Your gifts, whatever you discover them to be, can be used to bless or curse the world.
The mind's power, the strength of the hands, the reaches of the heart, the gift of speaking, listening, imagining, seeing, waiting.
Any of these can serve to feed the hungry, bind up wounds, welcome the stranger, praise what is sacred, do the work of justice, or offer love.
Any of these can draw down the prison door, hoard bread, abandon the poor, obscure what is holy, comply with injustice, or withhold love.
You must answer this question. What will you do with your gifts?
Choose to bless the world.
The choice to bless the world is more than an act of will, a moving forward into the world with the intention to do good.
It is an act of recognition, a confession of surprise, a grateful acknowledgement that in the midst of a broken world, unspeakable beauty, grace, and mystery abide.
There is an embrace of kindness that encompasses all life, even yours. And while there is injustice, anesthetization, or evil, there moves a holy disturbance, a benevolent rage, a revolutionary love.
Protesting, urging, insisting, that which is sacred and not be defiled.
Those who bless the world live their life as a gesture of thanks for this beauty and this rage. The choice to bless the world can take you into solitude, to search for the sources of power and grace, native wisdom, healing, and liberation.
More the choice will draw you into community, the endeavor shared, the heritage passed on, the companionship of struggle, the importance of keeping faith, the life of ritual and praise, the comfort of human friendship, the company of earth, the chorus of life welcoming you.
None of us alone can save the world. Together, that is another possibility waiting. Please follow the sound of the chime into the silence.
Our reading today comes from Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 through 21. Jesus feeds the 5,000. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said, and he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven. He gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children.
There's a story told by Nancy Bennett in Chicken Soup for the Soul, celebrating people who make a difference, of a young girl who was last in line of 4 sisters and 1 brother, which meant that she was last in line for clothing as well. Except for the ugly clothes that no one wore, the yellow sweater made by Aunt Martha with ducks on it, or the pants with flare-out ends when the style was slim, clothes that were stuffed in the back of the drawer until they were too small and thus passed on. Except for those clothes, Nancy's clothes were threadbare and stained. Luckily for her, because she didn't have much choice in the matter, until she was 10, she had the fashion sense of a warthog, and as long as it fit, she wore it. But then something changed. Nancy was next door playing with her friend Renee, and Renee's mother came out with a bag full of clothes bound for Goodwill. "Well, why don't you take a look at these clothes, see if there's anything you like before I take them?" And right on top of the bag was the most beautiful shirt she had ever seen. It was bright red and silky. There were no tears, no sweat marks, no runs, and it had several gold buttons on the front and one on each silky sleeve. Nancy was in love with this shirt. She crushed it to her stained t-shirt, thanking her friend and her friend's mom, and ran next door back to her house to show her mom her new shirt. Well, from that day until she was too big for it, Nancy wore that shirt at least 3 times every week. She wore it on special occasions, to school on the assembly days, and she polished the gold buttons to shine and hung it up after every washing. But it wasn't just the shirt that was different about Nancy. She was different too. With this new gift, she started to look in the mirror before she left for school. She combed her hair more than once a day. She brushed her teeth more than twice. She started to notice what other people wore and stole glances at her sister's fashion magazines. She started to take an interest in sewing and was soon making her own clothes out of cast-offs. Having something that you can call your very own can be life-changing. It can remind us of our own worth. There is value in ownership. At the same time, there is value in giving, and that's what today's about with our pledge drive kickoff. If you have spent any time in Christian churches, you have probably heard the miracle of the Loaves and Fishes story. Jesus and his disciples are out in a crowd of 5,000 men, besides women and children. Why not just say 15,000 people? I don't know. But there are a lot of people. And one person asked a question, and before you know it, Jesus is deep into Jewish theology and stories. I imagine Jesus is more of a kairos person, more in-the-moment kind of person, and less chronos, which is like constantly aware of chronological time, has a clock on. And night is drawing near. His disciples, who are maybe less in-the-moment kind of people, see the growing dusk and hear their rumbling bellies. And they're like, hey, Jesus, when's dinner? Why don't you dismiss the crowd so they can go and find their own, go to the towns at restaurants or something so we can have the food that we brought for ourselves. Well, Jesus had other ideas. He knew that the disciples wouldn't travel without food. And so he blessed their 12 loaves and 2 fish, or 5 loaves, sorry, and he blessed the 5 loaves and 2 fish, 12 disciples, and they started to pass around the food. And in the end, everyone is satisfied, and there were 12 baskets full of leftovers. Well, a high Christology interpretation of the story calls this a miracle story done by Jesus, kind of done on high. I count it as a miracle story too, but not of the traditional kind of high miracle, but of a miracle of mutual aid, the miracle of the potluck. Just imagine you're standing there. Jesus asks everyone to sit down. You sit down and kind of suddenly the smell of the grass or the heat of the earth is closer to your nose. And you see people start to kind of open their bags, see what they brought, how much they need for their journey home, how much they could share. Then you remember that, oh yeah, I guess I threw in a Cliff Bar, or oh, I have a bag of crackers. Or maybe in those days, maybe I have some dried olives and some dried fish. Oh, a flask of wine, that's what I brought. I could share some of that. A murmur grows as people turn to one another, sharing what they have, sharing their name, maybe where they came from. I called this a miracle, but if a miracle is something that is extraordinary, then this is actually not a miracle, because mutual aid and sharing resources were how early Christian communities survived. Right before this story, in the scripture verse, it said, when Jesus learned of something that was, he went alone onto his boat. Well, what he had learned about was a person's death. John the Baptist had just been killed. King Herod wanted to please Herodias' daughter, and he told her he would grant her any wish. Well, she wished for John's head. He granted it. Life was scary. Scarcity was everywhere. And so what did you do in such a world? You looked for people who shared the same values as you. And for these early Christian communities, those values were nonviolence, sharing resources, and mutual aid. These values helped them to survive in a very scary and violent world. Well, generosity and sharing resources are how we survive too. Quite literally, with our congregational polity, we don't have any extra funding coming in from the higher-ups, from the UUA. We don't really have higher-ups so much with our congregational polity, but no extra funding is flowing in to pay for ministers' salaries or for a building. And so the pledge drive is not just a benefit, not like a benefit, like an extra thing for Georgia Mountains, GMUUC. It's like NPR. We rely on you, our listener, It's how you survive, it's how you exist. You need everyone to participate and to be able to contribute what they can so you can keep the lights on and pay your minister. But what happens when you go beyond mere survival? A phrase comes to mind: inspiring connection with people, nature, spirit, advocating love through generosity, nurturing wonder, serving the world. Georgia Mountains, you don't just survive with generosity, you lead in generosity. Charlotte was telling me everything that you've been doing lately. And I guess I could have looked it up on the local news channels as well. But you have moved Share the Plate from once a month to every Sunday. Every Sunday sharing half of your offering plate with organizations like Lumpkin County Literacy Coalition, Rape Response, No One Alone, the Anata Casa, all these and more that extend the reach of your mission. This was already mentioned, but you helped Dahlonega tell the nation what your town stands for: love, not hate. It was just a little over a year ago, this was the one article I did look up, when you organized a unity march after a local person put up a KKK sign in downtown Dahlonega. You saw the need for an interfaith alliance, so you made it possible for Reverend Charlotte to create one, the Interfaith and Peace Alliance in North Georgia, and you hosted Dahlonaga's first in recent history Interfaith Thanksgiving service. Last year you raised $20,000 towards a $50,000 goal to fulfill a ministerial sustainability fund to help bring Reverend Charlotte on full time. It's really cool. I really like Reverend Charlotte. And you gave so much that it blew all your other pledge drives out of the water. So when you want something, you figure out a way to make it happen. That's the story that I keep hearing about you. Your recent history has shown what can happen with more mission. So let's talk a little bit about more money. After all, it is the pledge drive sermon. If the financial recession of 2008 was devastating to you, your family, and you're still recovering, if you lost your job or are working a lower salary than before, if you retired but had to return to work because your pension declined, if you're barely keeping your head above water, if financial obligations keep you awake at night, you may not be able to increase your pledge to Georgia Mountains UU, and you may want to consider whether charitable giving is a good idea for you right now. If, however, in the last 5 years, you have renovated your home, bought a second home, bought season tickets to a sports team or musical group, upgraded your wardrobe, maybe a little fancier than the girl at the beginning of the sermon, own multiple computers, phones, and TVs, belong to a private gym, have traveled abroad, my guess is you can probably increase, if not double, your pledge without compromising your quality of life. So what do you think? Is 2018 the year that you will double your pledge? Process is as important as product. Giving is about raising money, but it's also about the spiritual practice of participating in your faith as Unitarian Universalists. And so one of the ways I like to think about the pledge drive is having the goal to give so generously that it makes you seriously consider your values and why and what is most important to you as a Unitarian Universalist in this large and lonely world. Georgia Mountains UU, you know well that the world today is not that different from the days when the early Christian communities would gather together seeking comfort and purpose in a world of violence and hate and prejudice. You know that your peacefulness, your love, and your courage are life-saving gifts to North Georgia. Now it is time for you to consider what gifts you can give to bless this congregation. The choice to bless the world will draw you into community, the endeavor shared, the heritage passed on, the companionship of struggle, the company of earth, its chorus of life welcoming you. None of us alone can save the world. Together, that is another possibility waiting. Amen.